We want to welcome you to the Bible teaching ministry of Fellowship Bible Church, where our desire is to honor God by faithful obedience to His Word. If you want to understand the Bible better, please continue to listen as Pastor Matt Postiff explains and applies the biblical text one verse at a time. You can reach us with questions or for more teaching audio and print material at our website, fbcaa.org. You can also watch our services live at fbcaa.org/live. We want to thank you for listening and pray that you will be edified. Join us now as Pastor Postiff opens God's Word. We've been talking about serving as senders as we enter into a little portion of our church life, which is unique, different. It's not something that happens every day or even in every church. We've had been a long time since we sent a missionary to the foreign field. But we have sent out church planting folks, as you remember, from 2012 to 2016, and they're still working, so grateful for that. So we talked about the responsibility, we talked about the examples of how do we recognize who is in ministry, who is coming into the ministry, and we gave several testimonies, myself and Jansen, and some from the Scriptures. So that's where we left off last time. Now we're going to continue on and think about how the church oversees the work and that sort of thing. You have a comment or question?
The name of the person or family that we did send to a foreign field and when?
Yes.
I can't think of any myself.
Well, and I don't see, since it's before my time, I'm not sure exactly how involved the church was, but there were the Patricks. And they went to South Africa for some time. They, I think, ended up having some visa troubles, not credit card visa, but, the other kind. And that prevented them from continuing there easily. Also, we sent Robin Wilk and Rob Meisel. They're not foreign missionaries, but, stateside missionaries. But as I said, we're not making a huge difference between missionaries based on where we send them. Because the Great Commission needs done everywhere. We could send a missionary to the northwest or to the northeast in England, and those places in some areas are effectively unevangelized regions of the world. Missiologists have determined that, and it's frankly shocking. New England, the Puritans and the Great Awakenings and all of that, and now... See, things don't stay the same. One generation goes and another comes, and it could be all gone. So, yeah, they knew not Joseph, they knew not Joshua and the elders of that time, and so on. Yeah. Well, so we talked about observing the missionary candidate and being able to, hey guys, good to see you back there. Having the responsibility to make sure that the candidate is qualified, called, confirmed, has the desire, longing for the ministry, has a life that matches, that's qualified, has the abilities to do so. Then the church oversees the work of the missionary. There's a mutual accountability that goes on there. And in the case of a church arrangement with a mission agency, they're kind of a dual accountability. Actually more than that, because the missionary has an accountability to the agreement that they've made with the mission agency, but also with the sending church, the mission agency facilitating the sending church desiring to send the missionary to plant reproducing churches in the area where they're going. And that's the kind of church, that's the kind of missions ministry we believe in. We're not doing medical missions or benevolent missions, but we're doing evangelistic church planning, development of church leadership, training, Bible teaching, that sort of thing. So the agency, there's accountability there, accountability to the local church, that's the sending church, accountability to all of the supporting churches that are supporting the missionary, and so those are all important aspects. The church can, and I hope will and should, visit the missionary while they're away. We expect them to come back here. Why don't we expect ourselves to one or more of us to go visit with them. That's scary, huh? Get your passport ready, huh? That's an issue. Your real ID and all that sort of thing. Those are just things that missionaries have to deal with all the time as a matter of course, and we kind of embark on those things and we think, oh, that's a big deal, it's hard, yeah. I know your parents have had a time or two doing that, yes. I think we would, but that ministry is specially and carefully geared toward doing church planting work using medical missions. It's not just medical missions. There are missionaries that go, and all they do, really, of course they're Christians and they want to share the gospel, but they're not really attached to church planting. They just do, surgery, or they do, work in an orphanage or whatever. And it's fine, that's good, but our bread and butter our focus is the Great Commission, which is making disciples. So that's a good question. And if we had a circumstance like that, we would certainly carefully consider it. The difficulty with mission works like that is oftentimes the benevolent work swallows up the spiritual work, and it becomes the focus. And so we want to carefully fence the ministries that we support so that they don't go down that pathway. So, unfortunately, the mission that we supported, we still support the missionaries, but they had to move to a different agency, as some of you may be aware, because of a breakup at the original mission agency. So, I had I've had those kind of concerns, just like what I'm saying now, for 20 years, and some of them have come to fruition, unfortunately. But that's just the reality of sinners working together, and sometimes not having a clear focus on what the end goal is. But as for us, we want to focus on church planting, evangelistic, as we say, Bible teaching ministry. And that's a choice that we make. But on the other hand, I want to hasten to add that there are some things that churches do that they call missions, but they really aren't Great Commission missions. If they're just benevolence, then that's social gospel. That's not Bible gospel stuff. So we want to be careful to maintain fidelity to the Great Commission as the Lord gave it in Matthew 28. So visiting the missionary, I know that our sister's parents visited in New Zealand, and I've visited South America on 5 occasions, I think, and seen some of our missionaries. And I'm hoping to do so again, but the last time I went was just before COVID, and then for a couple years after that, there were all the travel restrictions and vaccinations and all those sorts of things, and it just didn't make a whole lot of sense. In fact, we were going to have a meeting with the Gospel Mission of South America. It's normally in South America, but they brought everybody up to Florida a few years ago. That was in 2022, I want to say. And we went down there and met, and several of us came back with COVID anyways, but we were at least able to go to the free state of Florida and enjoy time in Sebring there at a camp, which was very nice. So to get the missionaries together, fellowship, rest. You can imagine for pastors here in the States, missionaries even more so overseas in countries that were more tough, the lockdowns, being in those for 2 years, more or less, was just exhausting, trying to do ministry and keep things going. So a good time to get away and rest a little while. And I hope to be able to do that in the future. I despair, however, of being able to visit all our missionaries. I've had invitations to South Africa, and I'm sure all of our missionaries would be just delighted to have one or more of us come and visit with them and share the word or testimony or pray or with people, visit and just see the work. But, when you have missionaries in New Zealand and South Africa and South America and France and scattered about the United States, how do you go visit them all? You could go to France. All right. We'll sign you up. Get your passport ready, as I said, and We'll send you along. So what happens if the missionary has some kind of problem and needs counsel? Well, a difficulty, one of the first things they're going to do is contact their sending church and say, how do you think we should handle this? We're having a difficulty with the agency, or there's something with a coworker, or there's a problem in the church and need counsel or whatever. That's going to be a natural thing. We encourage the missionary by continuing to keep contact with them. The idea that you send a missionary and don't hear from them in 10 to 15 years is not a thing, okay? It's not a thing. We need to be in touch with those folks and encourage them. You know how much they need encouragement? You know how lonely it can be out there? I was talking about that a little bit last week, the loneliness of ministry. Ironically, being with people can still be that way. So they have that because they have the culture shock and the different language and culture and trying to understand how people think. I mean, you would be surprised at how sometimes people think differently in a different culture. Their logic and brain works differently. Not necessarily wrong, but you might have trouble ascertaining that it's not wrong at first when you're not used to that sort of shift in cultures. And so it seems wrong maybe, but it does present quite a contrast. The church assists the missionary with ongoing financial support, but not typically with 100% of the support, as in the mother-daughter model that we used with Howell. In the mother-daughter model, we had one mother and one daughter, and the parents provided all of the support initially for the work to go on. As we said, we supported that work over $300,000 in ministry salary, we could say, and work on the building, buying a building and that sort of thing. And some of that's coming back over the course of years to us, but it was a big investment. But it was a very worthwhile investment, wasn't it? I think so. I'm convinced that investing in the Lord's work is far better than investing in some other thing that you might spend your time and efforts doing. The dividends are great, although you don't get a monthly statement from heaven about that, so you have to be patient. And, like you get from your financial institution or your advisor, no monthly statements about dividends and growth. So support. The model we plan to use is to encourage multiple churches to support the missionary so there's a wider base of prayer and finances. Ideally, in my mind, you'd have maybe 10 or 12 churches. That's not realistic in terms of statistics these days. You know how many supporting churches some missionaries have? Like 50. Well, how do you visit 50 churches or keep up to date with 50 churches or whatever? So for long years, decades now, I've advocated that ideally we'd have even a consortium of churches that would say, hey, when we've got an opening for a missionary, we know like-minded missionaries, we'll bring one in and have them, interview at the consortium with the pastors or whatever, or visit, the 10 churches in the consortium and, approved, and say 8 of the churches have room in their budget or whatever at the present time. They have 80% of their support, 10% from each church. Now that's just me and my idealistic thinking, but independent local churches don't do that because we're independent and we do whatever we want to do and we don't listen to anybody else. You know what I mean? There's advantages and disadvantages to that. Like the Southern Baptists individual churches don't support individual missionaries. They support the mission fund of the denomination, and that fund funds the missionaries that go out. So if a missionary can get in and get supported by that, then they don't have to waste time for a year or 2 or 3 years going around raising support in churches. Much more efficient. Very good, actually, I think. There's an argument to be made for that. But then on the other hand, if the church doesn't know the missionary and they're just sending money to a fund, it's so impersonal that it's like, is that really support? It is in a way, but it's not great. So there's got to be some kind of hybrid, and that's why I'd kind of like to think of a consortium that would take on a missionary like Jansen and Cayley, and they'd suddenly have 50 to 75% of their support, and a good vote of confidence, to them, for them as they go to other churches to raise support, so that they might end up with 10, 12, 15 supporting churches, and that would be all. That would be great in my view. So multiple churches. Diversification of support helps the longevity of the missionary. I know, in fact, we started supporting one missionary, Dan and Liz Thompson, one missionary couple, I should say, some years back, a few years ago, after we were made aware, I was made aware that their main supporting church, which was their sending church, was giving them probably 20, 25% of their support, basically just cut. Maybe that didn't go to zero, I can't remember, but it was way down. And so when you're on the field and you have one major supporting church that pulls the plug, and you were at 100% support, now you're at 82 or 80 or something like that, that's a real hit. That's your salary, if it's $5,000 a month, has just dropped to $4,000 a month. How would you like that? That's living by faith. That's not what we're all used to. If our company did that to us, we'd probably say, goodbye, I'm finding another job.
How do they determine the level of support?
So the question on the table here is, how do they determine the level of the support? So that's based on, in GMSA and probably other missions, it's very heavily dependent on the understanding of missionaries that are already on the field. So they know, for example, in Argentina, relative to the United States, that inflation is way higher, or cost of living is, X amount. If you're in a case I'm particularly familiar with, if you're in northern Chile as opposed to southern Chile, the cost of living is much higher. So the missionaries have determined that compared to 5 or 6 years ago, they need to raise their support requirement by 30%. And you say, well, that sounds like a lot. Well, okay, but listen, if you think about it, from 2019 to today in the United States, the cumulative inflation has been how much? Does anybody know? Nobody knows? Some of you financial mavens out there have got to know. What's that? Yeah, it's roughly 20, but it's really like 21 or 22% cumulatively, so that what a dollar could buy you in 2019 takes $1.22 now to do. So if somebody is making $1,000 in 2019, to stay even, they need to be making $1,220. Is that right? Yeah? If they're making... You're not checking my math, thanks. I can say any number I want. People will believe it. If you're making $5,000 a month back in 2019, then that means $6,200, $6,400, whatever the number is, $5,000 plus 20%. Think about that. So our missionaries have gone from 50-some hundred to almost 7,000 required support for a family. Now, you ask how it's calculated. So it's based on the cost of living, housing, how many, if it's one missionary, a man, or a man and a wife, there's a formula that's kind of, they make up for that. If you have X kids, it's X times 300 or 200 or whatever the multiplying factor is. And they figure in for travel, conferences, materials, ministry. That's personal support. Taxes, okay, there's 10 to 20% right there. Support for the mission agency as a whole, there's a little piece taken out for that. Health insurance is over $1,000 a month. I mean, this is international health insurance. This isn't you go to the exchange and get Obamacare for a couple $100 a month. This is you're on your own out there. What about emergency evacuation if you get very sick? You got to have money for that. So, I mean, you would expect that, I would think, right? If you had some kind of problem that was not able to be handled in a local hospital there, that you would do that, come back here for cancer treatment or whatever. So, Yeah, there's a lot that goes into that calculation, and frankly, you can't calculate everything and say we're going to have enough money to handle every situation. Like, you have to stop at some point and say, we're going to live by faith. And the mission, as a mission board in the U.S. side, we have a couple of emergency funds that we have gathered over the years in order to do some things like that would require a larger amount of money. So, yeah, that's how it would be calculated. And just to give you an idea, like, you think going to a foreign country, like, it must be dirt cheap to live there. Well, there are a lot of foreign countries that have big cities that are just like our big cities. To find rent in one of those places is not cheap. You know, David and Christy Flink were in the city called Antofagasta, which had 400,000 people, and it was just growing like this. Because it's a mining town, and there's copper mines up in the hills and the mountains around there, and so people would be working there, heavy equipment, Caterpillar, miners. It's kind of a gold rush town almost, and, costs would skyrocket with that as well. So, and then, of course, inflation, when a country has inflation, well, that can actually be good if it's inflation relative to the dollar, because your dollar will go farther without having to raise your support. The dollar could go farther. Depends on the exchange rates and things like that. So if the exchange rate is poor, then you need to raise more support. If it's good, then you have a benefit.
Do we know what their level is going to be?
Yeah, it's right around that 7K level. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. We can do ministry on the cheap here with the way we have things set up. It's not so when you are going out and you don't have the support like we have provided for. I mean, they have housing here, right? They have to get housing where they're going. Well, that's a lot of money, as you know. So, yeah, don't let that number shock you. It's totally reasonable in my mind today. Now, 20 years ago, that number would not have been reasonable. But we're not living 20 years ago, Yeah, you have no idea. That's right. So we're assisting. Diversification helps longevity was the point that I was making. So if you have more churches, you have more ability to absorb a hit or a change in your supporting church roster. Neither model is right or wrong. I mean, a church could say, we're going to support this missionary 100% and send them right out and be done with it. That's fine. But the church needs to have a long-term vision that they're going to keep doing this, and not just like, well, we'll support a missionary this year and then we'll vote on them next year and the next year after that and maybe, decide not to. You can't jerk people around like that. You wouldn't want to be jerked around like that. So, longevity. Unity is expressed in multiple churches gathering, joining together to support a missionary. The ability to diversify also allows our church to touch more missionaries in more regions of the world. We could put all of our eggs in one basket. If we have an X amount in our missions budget, say it's enough to support one missionary or two, 100%, but the way that churches arrange it where they support 10 or 12 or 20 missionaries means that they have a connection with more, and they are able to support that and maintain those communications, we hope. Now, if you have 50 to 100 missionaries, and that's your boasting point, I doubt if you're able to keep adequate contact with those missionaries and really shepherd them and encourage them and help them. It's too many for one church to do that, unless it's a huge church and it has a lot of missions, emphasis, and the missions committee is active and the members are active and so on. So I don't want to be all critical, but just, we have to be, clear-minded about our support methodology, if you will. From a missionary perspective, an important aspect is support not only financially, but how? Prayer. By prayer. You know how many times people have a need and they pray, there's no supporter in sight. Something comes in the mail randomly from somebody, randomly, and it's the amount of money that they need for that need. Somebody gave a special offering for our brother and sister just last week to cover travel expenses, some of them. It's out of the blue, No, nobody's told them to do it or didn't know it, just out of the generosity of their heart. And it's very kind. And that's really how the church has existed all these years, of the kindness of people that support the work of the local church here and your local missionary. You know who that is, right? Me and my family. Yeah. Thank God for the support that we have received. More support in terms of prayer is better, more encouragement, more counsel, more, logistically, if one church closes, others can fill the gap. We know a missionary in Bibles International, her sending church was planted by a fellow that I know, and unfortunately circumstances came about where within this last year the church had to close. So she needs to find another church, to be a sending church. Otherwise she's kind of an orphan. There's with no connection to a body of believers here, which is quite discouraging. So she's got a new sending church and so on. Let's see, what else? Some churches don't close, but their mission philosophy changes, or the missionaries come back home for furlough and they find there's a new pastor, and the new pastor just really doesn't, he didn't know Joseph. He doesn't care. He's got a new direction. We're not going to do that mission stuff. We've got to reach our own community, might say, and so we're going to focus on that. And leads the church to do that. So, does the sending church now? So there are kind of two categories of churches that support a missionary. The way we look at them, just practically, one is the sending church, which kind of has the most skin in the game, and then the supporting churches that are just supporters. We're just supporters for a lot of missionaries. The 12 or 13 that we support. But we're not responsible for them in a particular way that a sending church would be. Special responsibilities in the event of a catastrophe. Who is the first line of help for those missionaries out there on the field? Sending church, in addition to the agency, together working to figure out what to do. If there was an evacuation, if there was a hostage situation, if there was a medical issue, a death in the family, a moral failure, the country closes to foreign missionaries and they have to come home, what do they do next? Where do they live? Well, if that happened in Chile, my vision is, get on the plane, guys. You're coming back here. Get with us. Maybe the house is still available or somebody else is in there. We'll figure out something and we'll make it work until you can find a different country to go into or decide to do mission or work in the United States or whatever, but it might take 3, 6, 9, 12 months to get their feet back under them after a catastrophe or a difficulty or something like that. The church may see a situation where the missionary is having a mental breakdown or something and say, hey, we're recalling you back. We're going to do a year of recuperation and counseling and whatever. There could be, I can imagine and have heard of situations, terrible situations people go through on the mission field or in a church situation that might require supportive care like that. Our understanding is that the missionary that we send remains a member of our church as they go and do that work. Now, there's an interesting question as to, well, when they plant a new church, do they become a member of that church too? Or, can you only be a member of one church? Like it's kind of not cool to be a member of two churches or something? We'll figure that out when the time comes, and other churches have dealt with that sort of thing, but it's our understanding that they will remain members, and our Constitution actually does have something in it about members who are Christian workers, who aren't necessarily resident with. In the case of, I can't use their name, but in the case of the missionaries that we talked about earlier today, say Wanda, did they remain members of their sending church? Or do you know how that worked? No, they did not? Okay. Not now. You don't know, because that was a while ago. So, okay. All right. But are they members at some other church in the United States? Okay. So yes, some special responsibilities, and may the recording of this message bear witness, and may you all bear witness as well in any event of a change in the church or a change in the leadership or whatever. Remember our missionaries. Don't let them hang out there, die on the vine, so to speak, with no support, no encouragement, no care, no communication, that sort of thing. We have to make sure that we continue to be behind them. And this is a long-term commitment. I mean, our dear friends who are training right now and orienting for the field are less than 30 years old. So that means they could be on the field for 40 years, more or less. So that's a kind of a long-term commitment. How long have we supported the McMahons, for example? Probably about that long, huh? Yeah, 40, going on 40 years, if not right there. So, yep. Okay, well, we're almost out of time. Let me just mention our philosophy and belief is that the priority of place goes to the local church in terms of its work and missions, because nothing else is mentioned in the New Testament. Mission agencies aren't mentioned in the New Testament. Lone Ranger missionaries really aren't mentioned in the New Testament. There's always a connection to ministry of a local church. So you could have a problem where a missionary sees himself as subject only to himself. He is the primary agent in missions, and it's his philosophy of missions that he uses an agency or uses a church to carry out his program, but he doesn't see himself as responsible to a local church. And what you get then is you can have, not always, but you can have somebody that's got a lot of, they put a lot of stock in themselves, a lot of pride, and, well, if that church and that agency doesn't like me anymore, I'm leaving and I'm going to use somebody else now to do this. Well, why? What's the problem? Was there a problem? And they go to this agency and that one and this church, and they keep having problems. Well, the problem is going with them, because it's them, maybe. It happens that way. So the missionary needs the accountability of a local church. The missionary needs to have that accountability of maintaining sound doctrine. You can't just go off and, from this church and start preaching something that doesn't agree with our understanding of the Scriptures. No, if you go start, dabbling in, this happened to another missionary that I knew of. I think I met one time maybe. Was in a foreign country, a closed country, and began imbibing Catholic teaching, and converted, and was recalled and disciplined by their sending church and removed from the work, as was 100% appropriate. Why are you spending time imbibing Catholic dogma when you're a Baptist missionary or a Bible church missionary? That doesn't make any sense. The missionary could also see himself as subject first to the mission agency, or the agency could see itself as, this is very common, the mission agency could see itself as the sending unit without accountability to local church per se, or viewing themselves as under or facilitators of. So the agency's requirements take first place. But if the agency is a facilitator, then the church has we could say, final say in that. So the agency should not see itself as a de facto replacement for the local church. The agency serves to facilitate the church to send the missionary to plant churches, because God's program is centered on churches, not agencies, not parachurch organizations. That's very common these days. Somebody gets disgruntled, or they think there's a ministry that needs to be done, so they go start a nonprofit, and they're now a ministry, and they start raising support and doing fundraising, advertising, and all that sort of thing, and they become their own little machine, and they become the de facto center of the outreach work without attachment to a church, and maybe their doctrine goes sideways and things like that. In our case, with Jansen and Cayley, the GMSA mission statement says, "For God's glory, we aim to serve sending churches and their missionaries by facilitating the establishment of reproducing churches in South America through evangelism, discipleship, and leadership training. So in this case, back to an earlier question, the mission does not believe that they should dabble in doing that through social work or through orphanages or through hospitals or whatever, or through schools, even though used to have some schools years ago attached to Gospel Mission of South America. But it's through evangelism, discipleship, and leadership training. So that's a philosophy decision that's been made by this mission leadership. All right, we're past time. Let me pray and then put a mark on the page here and pick up, Lord willing, the next time. Father, we thank you for allowing us to think together about the philosophy of missions and how we can best be supporters of work that goes on outside of these four walls and outside of our community. Lord, help us to be wise, to think through things, to work together, to be united in our help and support, and all for these dear ones who want to serve you this way. We don't know how it will all turn out, what it'll be like in 5 or 10 or 15 or 40 years, but we just entrust that to you. The uncertainties of those things don't stop us from endeavoring to serve you in some way. Best way we can figure at the moment anyway. Thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.